Welcome to the Supermom is Getting Tired podcast. This show is designed for moms who invest everything into parenting, but get overwhelmed, lost, and resentful. Listen and learn how to unburden yourself, feel calm, full of energy, and in control. I'm your host, Master Certified Life Coach, teacher, and recovering supermom, Torie Henderson. You are listening to the Supermom is Getting Tired podcast. I'm your host, Torie Henderson, and I have with me today a special guest. I have a supermom, Wendy. Wendy and I have known each other for a long time and almost, I would say, throughout the raising of her child. And I brought her with me today to talk about her journey through mothering a special needs child. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. It's really interesting to be in this position now after so many years of our work together. Thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you have one child and how old they are and kind of where you were when you first came to life coaching.
Okay, so I currently have a 22-year-old daughter who is on the spectrum, and she was diagnosed when she was maybe, 5 years old, and has been through many different diagnoses. It's been a long process, and I came to life coaching with Torie when she became a teenager. I think that's when things got really tough, more tough.
More tough. I remember because you would call me with, complaining about the issues you were seeing. And in my head, I'm like, this is normal teenage stuff. Like, this is not, you're so used to things being specific to your situation and your child. And then the teenage years hit and I thought, oh, this is typical. But she also had some other challenges. So let's talk a little bit, like, what did you find that was most difficult for you when you look back through your parenting journey? What was the hardest parts?
I think the most trying times was when she was super unhappy, socially disconnected, isolating herself, and she felt just a complete loss of motivation for life. And as a mom, it's really hard. I think in her younger years, I was really a bridge. I was a bridge for communication, for activities, for order. And I had enough influence that I could create a sense of positivity and meaningfulness. And I could set up play dates for her. But as she got older, that became her job. And that was increasingly more difficult as she grew older. So stepping back was a hard one, but also just witnessing your child have so much grief and so much challenge in surviving in the world. Meanwhile, all the other parents around me are discussing how their kids are thriving and their complaints were not on par with what I was experiencing. So it was very isolating for me too.
Right. Yeah. Isolating for both of you. Really starting, I think, in puberty.
Well, it started early on, I have to admit, because when your child has an 8-hour tantrum compared to other 3-year-olds, there's just no comparison. And even when she was young like that, I spent a lot of time indoors, just keeping her from the world and holding myself away from those who were going to judge and misunderstand. Because I remember my own brother and several members of my family saying, well, if you just had a man in your life, because I was a single mom at the time, or if you just spanked her, then she wouldn't behave like this. So I actually did try to spank her once, and that caused an even bigger meltdown. And just there were no answers. And of course, back then, we didn't have a lot of information about girls with autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really a pioneering moment for the autism research time and for girls on the spectrum in general. So
Right.
we did a lot of things wrong.
So you've got this daughter who's different than the other kids. It's isolating for you because you can't just go to a park, strike up a conversation with a mom and get that social support of like, oh yeah, it's so hard because your situation was so different. How did you find that support that all moms need?
I didn't have support for a long time. It was also my own lack of awareness or courage to seek out others. I just felt so much in shock with the diagnoses and with the process, because every week you're going to an IEP or a doctor meeting and you're trying so desperately to research and get on top of the information, but at the same time trying to maintain your own livelihood and lifestyle. It's overwhelming. So I didn't find a support team until she was in her teen years.
Oh, really? Wow.
Mm-hmm. I had a friend who came with me to meetings and was super helpful. My friends were great, but none of them had children, special needs children. And so, of course, they try to help you and try to understand, but they can't. So it wasn't until I got into a group of moms who all had special needs children that really transformed. I mean, I feel like sometimes I owe my life to them, because even now we've been meeting for 12 years, I think it is. And we still meet and we still have such a great sense of compassion and understanding that other people just can't have.
Yeah. And where did you find this group?
I found them through NAMI.
And NAMI is NAMI, in case people haven't heard of it, right? What does it stand for?
Yeah. National Alliance for Mental Illness. Okay. It's a grassroots, it's nationwide, but it functions at a grassroots level with volunteers. So you can get lots of information about mental health services, mental health diagnoses, and it's parent to parent support, or sometimes, people with the mental health issue can get support from others who have other diagnoses.
And so you went from the time she was born. I'm sure there were some differences that you noticed early on, maybe around 2 or 3, right? All
Even
the way
earlier.
You found the support group at how old was she when you found the support group?
She was about 13.
13. So we're talking.
And that's the point at which, so when she hit her teenage years, she no longer was fitting into the school system. So we had tried special day classes. She was too smart for that. And we tried schools that were for ED kids, emotionally disturbed, and she wasn't fitting into that group of kids. Again, this is 20 or 18 years ago, so they didn't have the systems that they have in place now. They tried mainstreaming her, and that became super overwhelming. So it was failure after failure after failure. And several schools later, that once she hit that teenage year period, it nothing was working. And so I tried homeschooling her after a stint of home and hospital, where random people give you work and you try to support your child to get the work done. And I decided it was much more effective as a teacher. I did homeschooling. That was really hard. because I was still teaching my own class.
Oh, you were homeschooling while teaching school. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And so I had to leave my career, and I thought it was going to be a temporary thing to take on be more effective. But what I learned in the homeschooling situation, you think, well, you just take away the world and you'll fix everything, because the problem is the world in relationship to your child. But the reality is your child, well, my child really wanted to be in the world. Therein was the problem. She didn't know how to function in the world and connect. So I had taken a problem and almost made it worse, I think, by taking her out. It's perplexing because there was no right answer. And in the end, we tried a private school. We ended up placing her in residential school, which was the best and hardest thing I've ever done.
How old was she when you placed her?
She was 14, almost 15. Well, I think she was like 14. She had her second hospital stay at that point, and we had no other choices. We felt that she wasn't safe. She was just very vulnerable to others, and we were losing her. That's how I felt. She lost herself. So residential it was, and that was its own harrowing experience. It was not all rainbows and unicorns.
It was not, I remember. Yeah. But it was the best fit because why?
Well, and I'm glad you point that out. The best you can find. And I think that's one of the most critical things for parents of special needs children is, we won't be fixing things for our kids. And that's problem number one. We want to fix it. And we think, just fix this little thing and then we're back on track. Well, for some, that's true. But for many of us, it's not true. And you can only do the best you can in that moment with whatever resources you can find. So we found residential, and she went through a couple different residential programs before we found finally success. But one thing I've learned, and with myself as well, is that we can give them the opportunities, but until our kids are ready or until we ourselves are ready, the success isn't going to happen. So you have to have a lot of patience. I wish I would have spent more time looking at understanding the challenges rather than trying to fix problems.
Like looking at the cause rather than the behavior, like what's the underlying cause?
I think it's easy to go into, backing up a little bit, it's easy to go into defensive mode, because how many times did I hear, what kind of parenting are you doing at home? Oh. And there's a lot of questioning what I was doing to cause it. I actually had a therapist tell me that because I didn't express enough anger, that was why my child was so angry all the time. And, it was heartbreaking to me to hear that. And I had to step out of that realm. And you meet a lot of unprofessional people along the way, people who say they know, but then after you start working with them, you think, there's no way. They're not listening to us. They're not seeing us. They're not part of a team. They're trying to do a cookie cutter approach. And my kid was not going to fit into any of that.
Right. If you want to learn how to trust your own instincts, what a great way to do it. Surround yourself with people who call themselves professional and give you advice, and just over and over and over again, you're like, that's not right. That's not going to work. That doesn't fit. They're not listening. Like, over and over and over again, you're having to constantly come back to yourself and trust, even though it's like so hard, but trust that what's, what's.
Well, that pendulum swings from sort of defensive, not able to accept reality. This isn't my life. It's not my child. It's the teacher. All of that to it's all my fault. And these professionals, I say in quote, who are telling me what, her behavior, she's not on the spectrum. She's far too social and smart for that. That's what they said. Or she's going into the fetal position for an hour to 2 hours every day because she's seeking attention. And I knew as a mom that wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I actually got an ed consultant help me, who was a speech and language pathologist. And, I think part of it was myself opening up to truths, both within myself and around me, to acknowledge what was happening with my child. But I think once you're open and you start to seek help from those who really want to help you, for me, that was that's when things started to change. Of course, it didn't make things better right away. It just gave me more of a roadmap to work from.
Right.
When you're kind of like going from the dark.
When you're open to like collaboration and you meet another expert who's willing to collaborate with you. Right. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you saying? Absolutely. And you're open enough to receive and grow and change perspectives, where when you were talking before about you blame the teacher, mm-hmm. It's like, is the same thing as the therapist blaming you, right? It just shuts down all growth, right? It's either it's her fault or it's all my fault. I'm doing it wrong. That nothing good comes from those things. Right. So it sounds like you knew like when to like reject somebody, be like, you're not helpful. You're not helping. You're not, right for us. But then there's also a personal growth journey that you had to go on. It sounds like when you found somebody that was willing to grow and collaborate with you, that you felt comfortable enough to then like open up your perspective. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think for each parent, we all need to find what fits to our own needs, to what our psychology is and our values. And you need to surround yourself with people who speak your language, but aren't going to be reverberating the same things that you yourself believe in, because then you're not going to grow either, you know? But I feel like when I found you, Torie, it was definitely the hardest point in the process, in the journey, because my daughter had just attempted suicide. I was devastated with just having worked so hard. And I think at that point I had adrenal fatigue and I didn't understand it. I just felt I went from being in control, trying to be in control of things, to having zero control. Because when your child goes into the hospital, you get almost no information. You feel such a lack of, I guess, control or lack of where you're heading. It's truly being in the dark.
Yeah.
And the grief is overwhelming at the same time. I think for me, I'd stored so much anxiety, and I had all the classic signs of PTSD, which many parents do. And so I wasn't taking care of myself at that point. So when she went to residential, there was a huge void. It went from being in the midst of the storm on the middle of the ocean in like the worst raft possible with no oars
Right.
to just laying on that same raft in the middle of nowhere, no ocean waves. It was just quiet. And the whole thing was, I look back and I think it's so surreal.
Your brain was in survival mode the whole time. You take over a decade of survival mode, right? That's what happens when people go to war, right? Their brain's in survival mode, and then they come home, and it's very difficult, that transition, and that's that PTSD, right? So you suppress all the emotions that you would normally have time to feel. If you didn't have a kid that required so much nurturing and attention and just energy, that you would normally process it along the way, right? But you didn't have the luxury ability as a single mom. Like, there was the support. You couldn't just cry. You couldn't crumble. You couldn't just throw in the towel and just like take off for a weekend and be by yourself, right? So you're in survival mode for all of those years. And then she goes into the hospital, where then you have the way you cope with it, the way a lot of moms cope with this feeling of vulnerability is by taking control. And so then all of a sudden she goes in the hospital, she's 13. You can't manage her social calendar anymore. She's fallen down a well, she's suicidal, right? Like, that you don't have the coping skill that you used all those years of controlling and managing. And so then it was like, we had to give your brain the update and say, okay, actually, right now in this moment, all is well. And it's okay to rest and relax. And it was hard. Remember, you would go on you would be communicating over email with the school, the residential school. It's, almost trying to like parent from afar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the brain was like staying engaged. It's like, felt normal to you, until to relax and just take a break felt really hard and scary. It's like vulnerable. It's like
one of the greatest lessons you gave me is looking at my thought patterns and how my actions and my thoughts really reflected each other, and how if I wanted to have a different experience, that I don't have control over my child or the outcome of her life, but I do have control over my thoughts and what I choose to do with my actions. And I think about that every day. I think, before working with you, Torie, I was very much problem solver, fixer, mom. And I think my identity has really expanded from that in a much healthier way. And I think the mantra that you helped me create was, no matter what happens with my child, I will be okay.
But there was a separation, right? It was so easy to lose yourself in the process. And it's like, if she's down, I'm down. If she's fine, I'm fine. But it feels so vulnerable. So just to separate you out and be like, okay, this is her experience and her life journey, and this is my experience and my life journey. And they don't have to be one and the same. But you can.
I think it's easy for moms of special needs children. We say to ourselves, but you don't understand, my child can't do that. That's too hard, or that they need me to help them do these things. And that may be true, but it took me a long time to understand that if we don't allow our children to make the mistakes and own their own mistakes, they also won't be able to have successes and own those successes. And we're conveying constantly to our children, you need me, you need me. And that becomes a behavioral pattern between the parent and the child. The child, and my daughter found this out in her own therapy sessions later, of like, oh, well, but I'm doing this because I want my mom to love me and care for me. And the therapist said, but you don't need her in order for that to happen. And we had just been locked in this. It started from, I'm sure, when she was very young. She had language issues. I recognized that, and I became her talking stick. And I tried to communicate with the world what she needed. And that just moved on to, oh, now she needs help with this and that. And I think still to this day, we both struggle with that.
Yeah. And I think that's also why it's so easy for you guys to become enmeshed, right? Is because you stepped into, you have to, in order to help your kid, you have to be really tuned in to what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they need, what's missing. And so I think you did a really excellent job of that, but that's also what makes it challenging to then separate and say, okay, life with my daughter is going to be unpredictable. We can predict the unpredictability. Do you remember that mantra we came up with?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's like, no matter what, it's going to be unpredictable. So how do I want to feel about the fact that life with my daughter is unpredictable? And just kind of separating out that, like, I do have a choice in the emotion I want to be in while this is my reality, and that, she's going to need me here and there. So I would love for you to tell me, like, when you have a mom, a single mom with an extremely special needs child for, say, 13 years, first 13 years of life, with very little support, what happens to mom when you are just doing your best in survival mode, trying to stabilize and, get your kid kind of situated and happy? What happens to you?
I think just complete deflation. There is no you. I think it took every bit of me, which, looking back, I would do it differently now. But I do remember I did a lot of working out because that was the only way for survival. I ran. Running. And I worked because I had to work. And I remember when I was first getting divorced thinking, I don't know how I'm going to make breakfast and get her ready for school and pack lunch and do all of that, and then come home and unpack and make dinner and get her to bed and all of these things. I won't be able to do it, but you do. Right. You do. We humans are amazing. We just adapt. But the problem is, over time, you lose a sense of reality in that you forget all these other elements in life that are so important to well-being.
Right. It's like your body's still there, but your spirit, it gets diminished and deflated.
Yeah. Well, and every moment you have, you're reading online about, well, what is this condition? And what about this medication? What about this expert? Can I take this workshop? What if I just read this book? And you just keep thinking, if I just do a little bit more, it'll all work out.
And so if you could go back and do it anything differently, what would you do differently?
Well, given what resources I had back then, I think I would trust myself more. I would have not been so focused on the fixing part and more on the understanding part. As I said earlier, I think also being more loving and less worrying. There's just so much to worry about. And we don't know what tomorrow will bring for any of us. And so while I was listening to other parents talk about prom dates and goals on the hockey field, whatever it was, it's like I couldn't compare my experience with theirs, but I wish I would have found other parents earlier.
Right. Like all that time you spent researching to try to solve your daughter's problems could have been spent researching support groups for mom.
Right.
Or,
and worrying less about, well, what will people think of me based on these situations? It was just so far-fetched, and people couldn't relate to having a child. Like I had to call a team of people over when she had a meltdown because I was not physically safe. People can't relate to that experience.
Right. And then with that tends to come judgment and unsolicited advice and things that aren't very hopeful.
And self-judgment though too, right?
So that sounds like something you would go back and redo, is to eliminate the self-judgment. And I think that's what support does. Like it's hard, it's easy to judge yourself when you're alone in your house, but when you're around the other people who are supportive for you and have your back, then it helps you not have that internal dialogue.
Definitely.
Yeah. How did life coaching help?
Life coaching was a lifesaver, honestly. I say that with all my heart because I don't know how I would have gotten myself out of the hole that I had dug for myself. I think life coaching gave me an opportunity to be alone with myself, having you there, and learn some new patterns of behavior that changed my life.
You know what the first thing we coached on was?
Place. What?
You know what the first thing we coached on was?
No.
It's interesting because it wasn't parenting. Probably because you were in that state of like, I don't want judgment and unsolicited advice, and I'm just going to go it alone. You're probably in that state. We coached you on, there's this man that I really like, and he seems to like me, but I'm too scared to get into a relationship.
Yeah.
So your daughter was like 12 then?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And so we coached a couple sessions and you're like, I'm engaged.
Well, it didn't happen that fast, but yeah. We've been together for 11 years now.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
So I think it's interesting that it wasn't even parenting that you called me for help with. You knew you were getting in your own way. And so again, you kind of trusted your instincts. So tell me, you said that you use the word failure after failure, which is hard to say, but like the schools, how many schools do you think your daughter went through?
I want to say 12 to 15.
In 8 years?
In her residential school, she went through 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. But in schools, there were many schools throughout her childhood.
So school after school after school, nothing's the right fit. Residential school is the best fit, but she still had to leave one, go to another one for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you finally found a fit and it was successful. Tell me what success looks like.
She was happy. She was engaged. She had friends. When we'd go visit her, she had assignments that she was proud of. She had teachers that she had connected with. She had a wonderful therapist who she loved and learned from. And she started to talk about owning her issues as opposed to it always being about us. It was her.
Nice. And that comes with age too.
Yeah, maturity had a big part of it in it. So that's why I say we can give them opportunities, but until they're ready, they aren't going to necessarily find the success that we hope they'll have.
Right. And so you finally find a school that's a good fit for her right as she's turning into an adult.
Yep.
So how long was she in this great school?
She was there for almost a year.
And that's what success looks like. Almost a year of a good school. Like, isn't that amazing? You know? So then what happens? She graduates. She becomes too old. She's 22 now.
Yeah, she ended up coming back, doing her senior year. And I think, she's an incredible human being.
She came back because of COVID or because of she got too old?
This was way before COVID. This was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. She came home. She finished her senior year of school. And then she decided to move back to Utah, where she had gone to residential school. And she started creating her own life. And in the last few years, she's made leaps and bounds. People said to us, oh, her level of function will only reach such and such. And she's really surpassed all expectations. She's doing amazing. She's independent. She's got friends. She's got a partner she lives with, and she's going to school now. She works. She has her dog in her car, and she's doing amazing.
And when she was 13, would you ever have imagined that was where she was?
No. I feared that she wouldn't see the age of 15 just because of her despair.
Yeah. Right. And so I wanted to, it's so easy for moms when they're in despair to just futurize and catastrophize and not have a higher vision for their child's future. And so,
and when you say that, one of the things that I remember when she first moved out by herself, I kept thinking about the doom and gloom thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to change it instead of what if she becomes really depressed and doesn't have any friends, and what if I started saying, well, what if she finds the love of her life and they live together and she finds such great companionship? What if she has a best friend that she really connects with? What if, and I started to, every time the negative would come up, I would say, but what if this happens?
Nice.
And one of the greatest lessons, another great lesson, I should say, that Torie, you gave me was the thought that some of my hardest times in life have been the greatest lessons and treasures, and that I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't go back and erase those experiences, those hardships, and that she needs those things too. And although those may be harder in my eyes and more painful for me to observe, just allowing her to have those experiences is a great gift too. And I see that now. I see that she's just such an amazing person, and other people see that in her too.
Right. Wow. That's really amazing. And yeah, because I can remember, coaching you on the phone, and then your daughter would text you during the coaching call, and you were like, immediate fight or flight response of like, she needs me. I gotta go. I can't, and like, I would coach you on like, tell her you'll call her back in 15 minutes. And you're like, I can't do that. Like we get so hooked on this, like, she needs me. I have to jump, and she needs me now. And this like urgent. So it was like, that's the social programming that we are supposed to protect our children from negative emotions and negative experiences. Like, we think a good mom would never allow their child to be unhappy, to struggle, to want us and not get us. And so it's like rewiring that, like, wait a second here. Like, there's actually a lot of good things that have come in my life from my negative experiences. And why would I want to rob my daughter of the ability to overcome those hardships? And then do you feel like, the victories are my victories, the failures are my failures, like that sense of ownership that you said that her therapist has really helped her with? I think you've really helped her with that too.
Well, and for me to learn that was step number one.
Yes, by letting go and trusting and this should be okay and all that scary, scary stuff for a mama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So any parting words of advice for someone who's still in the trenches, still in survival mode with a special needs kid?
I think the most important thing is to have a sense of self and to really hold higher thoughts for your children. Just hang on for the ride, find your supports, and reach out to other parents.
Yeah, I think other parents are medicine for the soul.
Yeah.
And life coaching is medicine for the brain.
Yeah.
And the spirit too, right? Like so much of it is like bringing your spirit back. Yeah. And, just when you started when your daughter went to the residential centers, when you really got back into your art.
Yep.
That was medicine for your soul.
Definitely.
And you are an amazing and talented artist. And now tell me, just before I let you go, tell me what your life is like now. You're an empty nester, but your daughter still needs you on occasion.
Yes, she does. I see her about once or twice a week. I get together with her, and now I only help her with things that she asks for help with.
Well, everybody give her a round of applause. It was a hard one to come to.
It was. And it still is. And I spend a lot of time trying or respecting her being herself as opposed to any kind of judgment.
Instead of thinking about how she should be, it's like learning to love and accept her as she is right now today.
Yes.
To change.
Yes.
Yeah. It's that love more, care less that we have to.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for your time. I really appreciate it. It's going to be really valuable for those exhausted super moms out there that are still in survival mode.
Yes. Thank you, Torie.
You take care.
Want a free life coaching session? Go to lifecoachingforparents.com and schedule yours today. And thank you so much for listening. I would love it if you would subscribe and share these podcasts with your friends. If you have a question you'd like me to answer on the air, go to lifecoachingforparents.com/recordmyquestion, and you can send me a voicemail recording or write me an email, and I'll answer it on the air. Thanks again. Have a great day.